There's a theater that never closes. Its stage is everywhere. In boardrooms where fortunes shift with a single glance. In living rooms where love curdles into resentment without a word spoken aloud. In coffee shops where strangers sit across from each other, performing versions of themselves that don't quite exist. This theater has no curtains, no intermission, no applause. Only actors who have forgotten they are acting, and audiences who have become performers, without realizing when the transformation occurred. You are in this theater right now. You have always been in it. The question is not whether you wear a mask. The question is whether you know which one you've chosen, or whether it chose you. Before we continue, a warning. The knowledge that's about to be shared cannot be unlearned. It will permanently change the way you see human relationships. If you're ready to abandon comfortable illusions and see what's behind the stage, subscribe now. Because this isn't just a video. It's the beginning of your journey under the mask. Now let us begin. Picture a moment, any moment. A woman sits across from her husband at dinner. The fork in her hand weighs nothing, yet it feels impossibly heavy. She lifts it to her mouth, chews, swallows, smiles. He asks if the food is good. She says yes. Her voice is warm, textured with affection. But inside, behind the architecture of her face, behind the careful arrangement of her expression, something else lives. A thought she will never speak. A truth that would shatter the porcelain surface of their evening. She has learned, over years of practice, to separate what she feels from what she shows. This separation is not dishonesty. It is survival. It is art. This is the first lesson. Power does not announce itself. It does not need to. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the most powerful. True power whispers. It suggests. It allows others to believe they have chosen freely, when in fact every choice has been carefully architected, every option pre-selected. The woman at dinner holds more power in her silence than she ever could in confrontation. She knows something her husband does not. She knows that the person who cares less controls the relationship. She knows that mystery is more potent than transparency. She knows that the moment she reveals everything, she loses the ability to shape his perception of her. Consider the texture of manipulation, not the crude, obvious kind that announces itself with threats and ultimatums. That is the tool of amateurs, of those who mistake volume for influence. No, consider instead the subtle kind. The kind that feels like love, like concern, like friendship. The kind that leaves no fingerprints. A man wants his colleague to fail, but he cannot be seen wanting this. So he offers help. Enthusiastic, generous help. He volunteers to assist with the project, to share the workload. And in sharing it, he introduces small errors. Nothing obvious. Nothing traceable. Just enough friction to slow progress, to create doubt, to make his colleague appear incompetent to those who matter. When the project fails, he is the first to offer consolation. He is the loyal friend who tried to save a sinking ship. His reputation grows while his colleagues diminishes, and no one, not even the colleague himself, can point to the moment of betrayal. Because there was no moment. There was only a series of helpful gestures that somehow led to ruin. This is the architecture of invisible defeat. It requires patience. It requires the ability to think in timelines that extend beyond immediate gratification. Most people cannot do this. Most people are trapped in the urgency of now. The hunger for instant validation, the need to be seen as right, as good, as powerful. But those who truly understand power know that it accumulates slowly, like interest in an account no one else knows exists. They make deposits that seem insignificant. A favor here, a confidence shared there, a moment of vulnerability performed with precision. And years later, when they need something, they withdraw from an account so full that the other person feels honored to give them what they want. There's a coldness to this knowledge, an uncomfortable chill that settles in the chest when you first recognize it operating in your own life. You begin to see the patterns. The friend who always needs just a little more than they give. The parent who loves conditionally, though they would never admit it, even to themselves. The partner who keeps you slightly off balance, never quite secure, because security would shift the power dynamic in your favor. You see these patterns, and you face a choice. You can pretend you don't see them, can return to the comfortable fog of believing that people are simply who they say they are. Or you can accept the truth that every human interaction is a negotiation, that love itself, in its purest form, is still a transaction of needs and fulfillments. That authenticity is often just another mask, more convincing because the person wearing it believes in it completely. Let us examine a specific mechanism, the mechanism of manufactured dependency. A mother raises her daughter with love, genuine love, but woven through that love is a thread of need. The mother needs to be needed. She needs to be the source of wisdom, of comfort, of validation. So she raises her daughter to doubt herself. Not obviously, not through cruelty, through concern, through questions that sound like care but function as undermining. Are you sure about that decision? I just worry about you. I only want what's best. And the daughter, who loves her mother, who trusts her mother, begins to internalize these doubts, begins to check every decision against her mother's approval, begins to feel anxious when making choices independently. The mother has created a bond that feels like love, but functions like a leash. And the daughter will spend years, perhaps decades, perhaps her entire life, trying to understand why she feels simultaneously loved and trapped. This is not villainy. This is human nature operating beneath the level of conscious intention. The mother does not wake up and decide to manipulate her daughter. She simply acts from her own wounds, her own fears, her own need to matter. And in acting from these places, she shapes another human being in ways that serve her emotional economy. We are all doing this, all the time, to everyone around us. We are all both victim and perpetrator in the theater of influence. The question then becomes not whether you manipulate, but whether you do so consciously or unconsciously, whether you take responsibility for the power you wield, or whether you pretend you have none. The person who claims to have no power, no influence, no ability to shape others, is often the most dangerous, because they operate without accountability. They wound without acknowledging the knife in their hand. They take without admitting they have received. They are the actor who insists they are not performing, even as they hit every mark with precision. Consider the workplace. A manager has two employees. One is competent but difficult, asks questions, challenges assumptions, makes the manager work harder to justify decisions. The other is less competent but agreeable, nods, smiles, makes the manager feel intelligent and appreciated. Over time, the agreeable employee receives better assignments, better reviews, better opportunities, not because of merit, but because of the emotional experience they provide. The manager will rationalize this, will find reasons why the agreeable employee deserves advancement, will construct a narrative in which competence and agreeability are the same thing. But beneath the rationalization, the truth is simpler. We reward people who make us feel good about ourselves. We punish people who make us feel inadequate, even when their challenge is legitimate, even when their difficulty comes from a place of genuine engagement. This reveals something fundamental about human behavior. We are not rational creatures who occasionally feel emotions. We are emotional creatures who occasionally rationalize. Every decision we make is first an emotional response, and only afterward do we construct the logical framework to justify it. The person who understands this, who truly internalizes it, gains access to a form of influence that others cannot defend against, because you cannot defend against something you don't recognize as an attack. Imagine a conversation. Two people discussing where to eat dinner. One person suggests Italian. The other hesitates. The first person does not argue, does not insist. Instead, they sigh. A small sigh, barely audible. And then they say, "Of course, we can go wherever you want. I just thought, since we haven't had Italian in a while, and since you mentioned last week that you missed it, but no, really it's fine. We'll do whatever you prefer." What has happened here? The second person now feels guilty, feels selfish, feels like they are denying their partner something small and reasonable. The emotional weight has shifted, and so they agree to Italian. But now the agreement comes with resentment. The first person has won the negotiation, but at the cost of introducing poison into the interaction. This is the danger of unconscious manipulation. It achieves short-term goals while eroding long-term connection. But what if the manipulation is conscious? What if the first person knows exactly what they are doing? Then the calculation changes. They must decide whether the Italian restaurant is worth the resentment, whether this particular battle is worth the cost to the relationship. The conscious manipulator is not necessarily more ethical, but they are more strategic. They choose their moments. They invest in a relationship when investment serves them. They create goodwill that they can later spend. They are playing a longer game, and in that longer game, they often appear more generous, more selfless, more loving than those who manipulate unconsciously, because they understand that true power requires the other person to feel empowered. This is the paradox at the heart of influence. The more powerful you are, the less you need to demonstrate it. The more control you have, the more freedom you can afford to give, because you know that freedom is itself a gift you have granted, and gifts create obligation. A king who rules through fear must constantly reinforce that fear, must constantly demonstrate his willingness to punish. But a king who rules through love, through the belief that he serves his people, that king can sleep soundly, because his people will police themselves, will internalize his values, will feel guilty when they consider betraying him. He has colonized not just their actions, but their conscience. Now we arrive at a darker territory, the territory of those who have been defeated so thoroughly that they do not recognize their defeat. They believe they are free. They believe they are making choices. But every choice has been shaped by someone else's architecture. A woman stays in a relationship that diminishes her. She tells herself she stays because of love, because of commitment, because leaving would be giving up. But the truth she cannot face, is that she stays because her partner has systematically destroyed her confidence in her ability to survive alone. He has done this carefully, through jokes about her intelligence, through concern about her decisions, through stories about other women who left relationships and ended up miserable, through controlling the finances so she never quite knows how much money they have, through isolating her from friends who might offer perspective, through being occasionally wonderful, so wonderful that she believes if she just tries harder, if she just loves him better, he will be that wonderful version all the time. She is trapped in a cage she cannot see, and the most tragic part is that she holds the key. But she has been convinced the key doesn't work, or that outside the cage is something more frightening than inside it. This is defeat without violence, defeat without a single raised voice. It is the most complete form of victory, because the defeated person becomes complicit in their own imprisonment. They defend their captor. They rationalize the bars. They attack anyone who suggests they are not free. Because to admit they are trapped would require admitting they have wasted years, perhaps decades, in a prison of their own acceptance. And that admission is more painful than continuing to pretend. But let us not make the mistake of simple narratives, of villains and victims. Because the man in this story, the one who has constructed this cage, he too is trapped. Trapped in his need for control. Trapped in his fear of abandonment. Trapped in a version of masculinity that equates power with domination. He cannot allow his partner to be fully herself, because her full self might not need him. And he needs to be needed more than he needs to be loved. So he creates a dynamic where she is diminished, and in her diminishment, he feels enlarged. But it is a false enlargement, a hollow victory, because he is now in a relationship with someone he has made smaller, and small people cannot truly see you, cannot truly know you, cannot offer the kind of recognition that actually satisfies the hunger for significance. So both are trapped. Both are performing roles in a play neither of them wrote, but both continue to perform because the alternative of stepping off stage and facing the emptiness behind the set, that alternative is too terrifying to consider. Let us shift perspective. Let us examine the person who refuses to play, who sees the theater and walks away. This person is rare, not because they are morally superior, but because walking away requires a tolerance for loneliness that most humans do not possess. We are social creatures. We need connection, validation, belonging. And these needs make us vulnerable to those who understand how to weaponize them. The person who walks away from manipulative relationships, from toxic workplaces, from families that demand conformity as the price of love, this person must be willing to sit with the discomfort of being misunderstood, of being called selfish, cold, ungrateful. They must be willing to be the villain in someone else's story. And most people cannot bear this. Most people would rather twist themselves into shapes that fit other people's expectations than face the social consequences of authenticity. But here's what happens when you walk away. When you refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish you. At first, there's grief. Real grief. Because even toxic relationships provide something. Familiarity. Predictability. A role to play. And without that role, you must face the question of who you are when no one is watching, when no one is making demands, when you are not performing for anyone's approval. This question is terrifying, because the answer might be that you don't know, that you have spent so long being what others needed, that you have no idea what you actually want, what you actually value, what you actually believe. So you sit with that emptiness. And slowly, if you can tolerate it, something begins to emerge, a self that is not reactive, not defined by opposition or compliance, a self that exists independent of external validation. This self is quieter than the performed self, less dramatic, less concerned with being seen, but it is more solid, more reliable. And from this place, you can begin to build relationships that are not based on manipulation or transaction, but on genuine recognition, on seeing and being seen. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but honestly. This is the path that few choose, because it requires giving up the immediate comfort of belonging for the uncertain promise of integrity. It requires believing that being alone and authentic is better than being connected and false. And in a world that constantly reinforces the message that your value is determined by how others perceive you, this belief is an act of rebellion. Now let us examine the mechanics of guilt. Guilt is perhaps the most effective tool of control ever developed. More effective than fear, because fear creates resistance. The person who is afraid is always looking for escape. But the person who feels guilty believes they deserve their suffering, believes they have earned it through their failures, their selfishness, their inadequacy. A parent who wants to control an adult child does not need to threaten. They simply need to sigh, to mention casually how lonely they are, how they never see their child anymore, how they sacrificed everything, gave up their dreams, devoted their life to raising this child who now cannot even visit once a week. The child, now an adult with their own life, their own responsibilities, their own needs, feels the weight of this guilt settle into their chest, feels like a bad person, a selfish person, and so they visit, they call, they rearrange their life to accommodate the parent's needs, not because they want to, but because the alternative is feeling like a monster. This is control through emotional debt. The parent has created a ledger in which they are always owed more than they have received. Every sacrifice is recorded. Every difficulty is cataloged. Every moment of hardship is preserved as evidence of how much they gave. And the child can never repay this debt, can never do enough, because the debt is not real. It is a construction, a story the parent tells to maintain their position at the center of the child's emotional life. And the tragedy is that the parent believes this story, believes they are owed, believes their child is genuinely selfish for wanting a life that does not revolve around parental need. So both are trapped in a dynamic that satisfies neither, but which neither knows how to escape. The child who breaks free from this dynamic must be willing to be seen as cruel, must be willing to say, "I love you, but I will not organize my life around your emotional needs. I will not accept guilt as the foundation of our relationship." This statement, this boundary, will be experienced by the parent as abandonment, as betrayal, as proof that they were right all along, that the child is selfish. And the child must be strong enough to allow the parent to believe this, must be strong enough to know that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of freedom. But what of the parent? What of their experience? They are not villains. They are wounded people who learned that love means sacrifice, that parenthood means martyrdom, that their value is determined by how much they give up. They were taught this by their parents, who were taught by their parents, in an unbroken chain of emotional dysfunction stretching back generations. They genuinely believe that guilt is love, that making someone feel bad for not meeting your needs is a legitimate form of connection. And they will die believing this, unless something interrupts the pattern, unless someone loves them enough to refuse to participate in the dynamic. To say, I will not feel guilty for having boundaries. I will not accept that love requires self-erasure. This brings us to a crucial distinction. The distinction between influence and manipulation. Both involve shaping another person's behavior. Both involve understanding psychology and using that understanding strategically. But influence respects agency. Influence presents options and allows genuine choice. Manipulation removes choice while maintaining the illusion of it. Influence says, here is what I need. Here is what I can offer. Let us find a way forward that serves us both. Manipulation says, you are free to choose, but I have arranged the options so that only one choice is tolerable, and I will make you believe you arrived at it independently. A leader who influences says, this is the direction I believe we should go, and here is why. I am open to other perspectives. I may be wrong, but I am advocating for this path because I believe it serves our collective interest. A leader who manipulates says, I am not telling you what to do. I am simply sharing information, and the information they share is carefully curated to lead to only one conclusion. They present themselves as neutral, as simply facilitating a process, when in fact they are orchestrating an outcome. And when that outcome is achieved, they can claim they were not responsible, that the team decided, that it was a democratic process. They have power without accountability, influence without responsibility. This is the seduction of manipulation. It allows you to get what you want while maintaining the appearance of being reasonable, of being collaborative, of respecting others. It allows you to win while looking like you are not even playing. And in a culture that values the appearance of equality, of consensus, of shared decision-making, this form of power is particularly effective because it operates beneath the level of what can be named or challenged. But there is a cost. The cost is that you must always be performing, must always be calculating, must always be 3 steps ahead, anticipating reactions, managing perceptions, controlling narratives. You can never relax, can never simply be, because being requires vulnerability, and vulnerability would expose the machinery of your influence. So you are trapped in a prison of your own effectiveness. You have become so skilled at shaping others that you have lost the ability to be shaped, to be surprised, to be changed by genuine encounter with another human being. Consider the person who has mastered the art of appearing vulnerable. They share struggles, but only struggles that make them sympathetic. They admit flaws, but only flaws that are actually strengths in disguise. I work too hard. I care too much. I am too loyal. They cry, but their tears are strategic. Time to create maximum impact, designed to shift the emotional temperature of a conversation in their favor. They have learned that vulnerability is currency, that people trust those who appear to reveal themselves. So they perform revelation. They perform authenticity. And it works. People feel close to them, feel like they truly know them. But what they know is a carefully constructed character, a role performed so consistently that even the performer sometimes forgets it as a role. This is perhaps the most sophisticated form of manipulation, because it does not feel like manipulation. It feels like intimacy. The person on the receiving end feels privileged, feels chosen, feels like they are seeing something real, and they're seeing something real. But it is not the whole truth. It is the truth that serves a purpose, the truth that creates a specific kind of bond, a bond in which the vulnerable person is always slightly elevated, always the one who is brave enough to share, always the one who is deep enough to have struggles worth sharing, and the other person becomes the audience, the witness, the one who receives the performance and mistakes it for friendship. Years can pass in this dynamic, decades, a lifetime, and the audience never realizes they have been kept at a distance, never realizes that they know only what they were meant to know, that they have been given access to a room, but not to the house, that the person they believe they know intimately is actually a stranger who has mastered the art of seeming familiar. And what of the performer? What is their experience? They are lonely, profoundly lonely, because they are never truly seen. They have created a version of themselves that is lovable, that is interesting, that is compelling, and that version receives love, receives attention, receives validation. But they, the person beneath the performance. They receive nothing because no one knows they exist. They have traded genuine connection for the safety of control, and the safety is real. No one can reject them because no one has access to the self that could be rejected. But the cost is that no one can truly accept them either. They are safe and starving simultaneously. Let us now examine the phenomenon of gaslighting. The term has become popular, perhaps overused, but the mechanism it describes is ancient and devastating. Gaslighting is the systematic undermining of another person's perception of reality. It is saying, "That didn't happen. You are remembering wrong. You are too sensitive. You are imagining things." It is taking someone's lived experience and replacing it with your narrative. And when done consistently, over time, it creates a profound disorientation. The person begins to doubt their own memory, their own judgment, their own sanity. They become dependent on the gaslighter to tell them what is real. And in that dependence, the gaslighter gains total control. This is not always conscious. Sometimes people gaslight because they genuinely cannot tolerate being wrong, cannot tolerate the cognitive dissonance of having behaved badly. So they rewrite history. They convince themselves that their version is true, and they are so convinced that they convince others. They are not lying. They are living in an alternate reality that they have constructed to protect their self-image. And they need others to live in that reality too. Because if others remember differently, if others hold them accountable, then the protective fiction collapses. But sometimes gaslighting is conscious, is strategic, is a tool used by someone who understands that controlling the narrative is controlling the relationship. They know that if they can make you doubt yourself, they can make you accept anything. They can cheat and convince you that you are paranoid. They can steal and convince you that you miscounted. They can hurt you and convince you that you are too sensitive. They can create a reality in which they are always right, always reasonable, always the victim of your unreasonable expectations. And you, exhausted from trying to prove what you know to be true, eventually give up, eventually accept their version. Not because you believe it, but because fighting it requires more energy than you have. The person who escapes gaslighting must learn to trust themselves again, must learn that their perception is valid even when someone else denies it, must learn that they do not need consensus to know what they experienced. This is harder than it sounds, because we are social creatures who rely on shared reality. When someone we love, someone we trust, tells us that our reality is false, it creates a vertigo that is difficult to describe. The ground disappears, and learning to stand on your own perception, to say, "I know what I experience regardless of what you say," this is an act of profound courage. Now we must discuss the role of society in all of this, because manipulation does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs in a context that teaches us, from birth, that some forms of manipulation are acceptable, even admirable. We call it politeness. We call it professionalism. We call it getting along. A child learns early that expressing genuine emotion is dangerous. That anger is unacceptable. That sadness is weakness. That joy must be modulated to avoid making others uncomfortable. So the child learns to perform, to smile when they are hurt, to say they are fine when they are not, to pretend enthusiasm for things that bore them, to hide their true self behind a mask of social acceptability. And we reward this. We call these children well-behaved, mature, easy. We give them approval, attention, love. And we withhold these things from children who cannot or will not perform, who insist on being authentic even when authenticity is inconvenient, who cry when they are sad, who rage when they are angry, who refuse to pretend. These children are called difficult, problematic. They are punished, medicated, isolated, until they learn, until they understand that survival requires performance, that love is conditional on compliance. So we create a society of performers, of people who have learned to hide their true selves so deeply that they can no longer find them. And then we wonder why we feel disconnected, why relationships feel hollow, why we can be surrounded by people and still feel profoundly alone. It is because we are alone. We are surrounded by masks talking to masks, by performances responding to performances. The actual humans, the vulnerable, messy, complicated humans beneath the masks. They never meet. They are too dangerous, too unpredictable, too likely to disrupt the careful choreography of social interaction. But here is the paradox. The very thing we hide, the very thing we are taught is unacceptable, that is the thing that creates genuine connection, vulnerability, authenticity, the willingness to be seen as we actually are, not as we wish to be perceived. This is terrifying because it means risking rejection, risking judgment, risking the discovery that we are, in fact, unlovable. But it is also the only path to being truly known, to being loved not for our performance, but for our actual self. Most people never take this risk. They spend their entire lives performing. They marry someone who loves their performance. They raise children who learn to perform. They build careers based on performing the role of competent professional. And they die having never been truly seen, having never allowed anyone close enough to see the fear, the doubt, the shame, the longing that lives beneath the surface. They die safe and unknown. Is this tragic? Or is it simply realistic? Perhaps the truth is that complete authenticity is not possible. Not in a world that requires cooperation, that requires us to live in close proximity to others, that requires some degree of performance to function. Perhaps the goal is not to eliminate the mask, but to know when we are wearing it, to choose consciously when to perform and when to reveal, to have relationships, even if only a few, in which we can remove the mask, in which we can be seen and accepted in our full complexity. This requires finding people who are also willing to remove their masks. And these people are rare, because removing the mask is dangerous. It means admitting that you are not always strong, not always right, not always in control. It means showing your wounds, your failures, your fears. And most people cannot tolerate this in themselves, let alone in others. They need to believe in the performance, need to believe that everyone else has it figured out. Because if everyone else is struggling too, if everyone else is just as lost and frightened and uncertain, then there is no one to look to for answers. Then we are all just humans stumbling through existence, making it up as we go, hoping we don't cause too much damage along the way. This realization can be liberating or devastating, depending on your perspective. Liberating because it means you are not uniquely broken. Everyone is performing. Everyone is uncertain. Everyone is doing their best with limited information and inherited wounds. Devastating because it means there are no adults, no one who actually knows what they are doing, no authority to defer to, just humans, all the way down, each trying to convince the others that they have it together. Let us return to power, to the question of how to defeat someone without raising your voice. We have explored many mechanisms: guilt, gaslighting, manufactured dependency, strategic vulnerability. But there is one mechanism we have not yet named: the mechanism of simply being unbothered, of refusing to engage, of maintaining such complete emotional neutrality that the other person cannot find purchase, cannot provoke a reaction, cannot draw you into their drama. This is perhaps the most infuriating form of power, because it gives the other person nothing to work with. They escalate, they accuse, they manipulate, and you remain calm, not cold, not dismissive, simply calm. You acknowledge their feelings without taking responsibility for them. You set boundaries without anger. You say no without explanation or justification. You refuse to defend yourself against accusations that are not based in reality. You simply exist in your own truth, unbothered by their attempts to destabilize you. This requires tremendous inner strength, because the natural human response to attack is defense. When someone accuses you of something, you want to prove them wrong. When someone tries to make you feel guilty, you want to justify your choices. When someone escalates emotionally, you want to match their energy. But the person who has mastered this form of power does none of these things. They understand that engaging is losing, that the moment you defend, you have accepted the premise that you need to defend, that the moment you justify, you have accepted that justification is required, that the moment you match their emotional escalation, you have given them control over your emotional state. So instead, you remain centered. You say, "I understand you feel that way. I see this differently." And then you stop talking. You do not explain. You do not convince. You do not argue. You simply state your position and allow them to have their reaction. And their reaction, no matter how intense, does not change your position, because your position is not based on their approval. It is based on your own values, your own assessment, your own truth. This is devastating to someone who is used to controlling through emotional manipulation, because all their tools stop working. Guilt does not work on someone who does not accept unearned guilt. Gaslighting does not work on someone who trusts their own perception. Anger does not work on someone who does not fear anger. They are left with nothing, and in that nothing, they must face themselves. Must face the fact that their power was always borrowed, was always dependent on the other person's willingness to be controlled. But we must be careful here, because this form of power can also be a form of cruelty. There is a difference between healthy boundaries and emotional withdrawal, between refusing to be manipulated and refusing to be affected. Some people use this calm, this unbothered stance, as a way to avoid genuine engagement, as a way to never be vulnerable, to never let anyone in. They have built a fortress and called it strength, but it is not strength. It is fear wearing the mask of power. True strength is being able to be affected and still maintain your center, being able to feel the full weight of someone else's pain, someone else's anger, someone else's need, and still hold your boundaries. Not because you are unmoved, but because you understand that taking responsibility for their emotions does not serve either of you. That you can love someone and still say no. That you can care deeply and still refuse to be controlled. This is the razor's edge, the place where power and compassion meet, where you are strong enough to hold your ground and soft enough to remain open, where you can see someone's manipulation clearly and still have empathy for the wounds that drive it, where you can protect yourself without dehumanizing the person you are protecting yourself from. Most people cannot walk this edge. They fall to one side or the other. Either they are too soft, too willing to absorb others' emotions, too quick to sacrifice their own needs, or they are too hard, too defended, too unwilling to be touched by another's humanity. Both positions are understandable. Both are attempts to navigate a world that is often hostile, often demanding, often more than any one person can bear. But neither position leads to genuine connection. Neither position allows for the kind of relationship where two people can be fully themselves and still choose each other. What would such a relationship look like? It would look like two people who know their own masks, who can take them off with each other, who can say, "This is who I am when I am not performing. This is my fear. This is my shame. This is my longing." And the other person can receive this without trying to fix it, without trying to use it, without trying to make it about themselves. They can simply witness, simply say, "I see you." And in that seeing, in that being seen, something shifts. The isolation that is the human condition, the fundamental aloneness of being a consciousness trapped in a body, that isolation is momentarily bridged. Not eliminated, never eliminated, but bridged. And in that bridge, there is relief, there is rest, there is the possibility of being known. But such relationships are rare, because they require both people to have done the work, to have examined their own patterns, to have faced their own capacity for manipulation, to have acknowledged the ways they use others to avoid facing themselves. Most people have not done this work. Most people are still operating from their wounds, still trying to get from others what they cannot give themselves, still believing that if they can just find the right person, the right job, the right circumstance, then they will finally feel whole, finally feel safe, finally feel enough. This is the great illusion, the belief that wholeness comes from outside, that another person can complete you, that achievement can validate you, that approval can make you worthy. It cannot. It never could, because the hole you are trying to fill is not a hole that can be filled from outside. It is a hole that was created by disconnection from yourself, by years of performing, by years of hiding, by years of believing that who you actually are is not acceptable. And no amount of external validation can heal that wound. Only reconnection with yourself can heal it. Only the willingness to stop performing and start being can heal it. But this is terrifying, because being means facing everything you have been running from, every inadequacy, every failure, Every moment of shame. Every time you were cruel, or cowardly, or selfish. Every time you hurt someone. Every time you betrayed yourself. All of it. The full weight of your humanity. And most people would rather keep performing, would rather keep running, would rather stay in relationships that do not satisfy them, in jobs that do not fulfill them, in lives that feel like they belong to someone else. Because the alternative of stopping and facing themselves, is too much, too painful, too likely to reveal that they have wasted years, decades, a lifetime, being someone they are not. And yet there are people who stop, who turn and face themselves, who do the brutal work of self-examination, who acknowledge their patterns, their wounds, their capacity for harm, who take responsibility not just for their actions, but for their impact, who stop blaming others for their unhappiness and start asking what they are contributing to it. These people are not saints. They are not perfect. They still manipulate sometimes, still perform sometimes, still fall back into old patterns when they are tired or scared or overwhelmed. But they notice, they catch themselves, they apologize, they try again, and slowly, over time, they become more integrated, more whole, more able to be present with themselves and others. These are the people who can defeat you without raising their voice. Not because they are manipulative, but because they are grounded. They know who they are. They know what they value. They know what they will and will not accept. And they communicate this clearly, calmly, without apology or aggression. They do not need to convince you, do not need you to agree, do not need your approval. They simply state their truth and allow you to decide how you will respond. And in that allowing, in that refusal to control your response, they hold a power that is unassailable, because it is not dependent on you. It is not borrowed from your reaction. It simply is. This is the power that comes from self-knowledge, from self-acceptance, from the willingness to be disliked, misunderstood, rejected, and still remain true to yourself. It is not a power that dominates. It is a power that liberates. Because when you are not trying to control others, when you are not dependent on their approval, when you are not performing for their validation, you free them to be themselves as well. You create space for genuine encounter, for real relationship, for the possibility that two people can meet without masks and recognize each other. But this requires both people to be willing, and often they are not. Often, one person removes their mask and the other person cannot tolerate it, cannot tolerate the vulnerability, cannot tolerate the authenticity, cannot tolerate being asked to show up as themselves rather than as their performance. So they leave, or they attack, or they try to force the other person back into their mask. And the person who has removed their mask must decide whether to put it back on for the sake of the relationship, or whether to let the relationship end, to accept that not everyone can meet them where they are, that some people are still too invested in the theater to step off stage. This is loss, real loss, because even relationships that were based on performance provided something: companionship, familiarity, the comfort of not being alone. And choosing authenticity often means choosing aloneness, at least for a while, at least until you find others who are also willing to be real. And there's no guarantee you will find them, no guarantee that the risk will pay off. You might remove your mask and discover that no one wants to see what is underneath, that the performance was more lovable than the reality. This is the fear that keeps most people masked, the fear that their true self is not enough, is not lovable, is not worthy of connection. And sometimes that fear is confirmed. Sometimes you show someone who you really are and they reject you. Sometimes you are vulnerable and it is used against you. Sometimes you trust and you are betrayed. This is the risk of being human, of opening yourself to connection. There are no guarantees, no insurance against heartbreak, no way to be certain that your vulnerability will be met with care rather than exploitation. You simply have to decide whether the possibility of genuine connection is worth the risk of genuine pain. And different people will answer that question differently, and both answers are valid. But here's what I have observed. The people who choose performance, who choose safety, who choose to keep their masks on, they avoid certain kinds of pain. The pain of rejection, the pain of betrayal, the pain of being seen and found wanting. But they experience a different kind of pain, the pain of isolation, the pain of never being known, the pain of living a life that feels like it belongs to someone else. And this pain is chronic. It does not spike and recede like the pain of heartbreak. It is constant, a low-grade ache that becomes so familiar you stop noticing it. Until one day you are old and you look back and you realize you were never really there. You were always performing, always hiding, always waiting for permission to be yourself. And the permission never came, because no one can give it to you. You have to give it to yourself. So the question is not whether you will experience pain. You will. The question is which pain you choose. The acute pain of vulnerability and possible rejection, or the chronic pain of isolation and self-abandonment. Neither is easy. Neither is comfortable. But one leads to the possibility of genuine connection, and the other leads to safety and loneliness. You must decide which you can live with, which you can die with, because you will die with one or the other. We all do. Now let us consider the person who uses this knowledge for harm, who understands all of these mechanisms and uses them consciously to exploit others. This person exists. They're often called sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, labels that attempt to capture something that is difficult to name. A person who lacks empathy, who sees others as objects to be used rather than subjects to be known, who understands human psychology, not to create connection, but to create control. These people are dangerous, not because they are violent, though some are, but because they are convincing. They have studied human behavior the way a scientist studies a specimen. They know what to say to gain trust. They know how to mirror your values, your interests, your desires. They know how to make you feel seen, understood, special, and they use this knowledge to get what they want. Money, sex, power, status, whatever their particular hunger is. And when they have extracted what they need, they move on, leaving behind people who are confused, hurt, questioning their own judgment, wondering how they could have been so wrong about someone, how they could have missed the signs. But the signs are difficult to see, because these people are skilled performers. They have been performing their entire lives. They learned early that their authentic self, whatever that is, does not get them what they need. So they created a self that does. A self that is charming, attentive, generous. A self that seems almost too good to be true. And it is too good to be true. But by the time you realize this, you are already invested, already attached, already making excuses for behavior that you would never tolerate from anyone else. This is how they operate. They create intense connection quickly. They overwhelm you with attention, with affection, with promises. They make you feel like you have found something rare, something special. And in that feeling, you lower your defenses. You ignore red flags. You rationalize inconsistencies. You believe their explanations even when those explanations do not quite make sense. Because you want to believe. Because the alternative, that you have been deceived, that this person you have opened yourself to is not who they claim to be. That alternative is too painful to consider. So you stay. You make excuses. You try harder. You believe that if you just love them enough, if you just understand them enough, if you just give them enough, they will become the person they pretended to be at the beginning. But they will not, because that person never existed. That person was a role, a performance designed to hook you. And now that you are hooked, the performance is no longer necessary. Now you see the person beneath the mask, and that person is cold, calculating, indifferent to your pain, annoyed by your needs, contemptuous of your vulnerability. And still, you might stay, because leaving requires admitting you were wrong, admitting you were deceived, admitting that the time you invested, the love you gave, the sacrifices you made, they were all based on a lie. And this admission is devastating. So you stay. You hope. You wait for the person from the beginning to return. And sometimes they do return. Briefly. Just long enough to renew your hope. Just long enough to keep you hooked. And then they disappear again. And this cycle continues until you are so depleted, so confused, so disconnected from yourself that you do not remember who you were before you met them. This is the goal. Not consciously, perhaps, but functionally. to make you so dependent, so uncertain, so grateful for scraps of affection that you will accept anything, that you will tolerate anything, that you will give anything, and they will take, and take, and take, until there is nothing left, and then they will leave. Or they will stay and find someone else to take from while keeping you as a backup, as a source of stability while they pursue excitement elsewhere. And you will know, on some level, that this is happening, but you will not leave, because leaving requires a self to return to, and you have given yourself away, piece by piece, until you are hollow. Recovery from this kind of relationship is long and painful. It requires rebuilding yourself from the ground up, relearning to trust your own perception, relearning to value your own needs, relearning that you are worthy of respect, of care, of genuine love. And this relearning is difficult because the relationship has confirmed your deepest fear, that you are not enough, that you are not lovable, that you are only valuable for what you can provide. And even though intellectually you may understand that this is not true, that the problem was the other person's incapacity for genuine connection, emotionally you carry the wound, the belief that if you had just been better, smarter, more attractive, more understanding, they would have loved you the way you needed to be loved. But this is not true. They could not have loved you, not because you were insufficient, but because they are incapable. They do not have the equipment for genuine love. They have the equipment for performance, for extraction, for using others to fill a void that cannot be filled. And no amount of your love, your effort, your sacrifice could have changed this. You were not in a relationship with a person. You were in a relationship with a mask. And beneath the mask was not another person. Beneath the mask was emptiness, a void that consumes everything that comes near it and is never satisfied. Understanding this is crucial, because without this understanding, you will blame yourself, will believe that you failed, will carry shame that is not yours to carry. The shame belongs to the person who used you, but they will not carry it. They do not have the capacity for shame. They have rationalized their behavior so completely that they believe they are the victim, that you were too demanding, too needy, too sensitive. They have rewritten the story so that they are the hero and you are the villain. And they will tell this story to others, will use it to gain sympathy, will use it to hook the next person, and the cycle will continue. So what do you do with this knowledge? How do you protect yourself? The answer is not to become cynical, not to close yourself off, not to assume that everyone is a manipulator, because most people are not. Most people are simply wounded humans trying their best, making mistakes, hurting others unintentionally, struggling with their own patterns and limitations. Most people are capable of growth, of change, of genuine connection, if they are willing to do the work. The key is to pay attention, to trust your instincts, to notice when something feels off, even if you cannot articulate why, to notice when someone's words and actions do not align, to notice when you feel confused, anxious, uncertain in a relationship that is supposed to make you feel secure, to notice when you are making excuses for someone's behavior, when you are working harder to maintain the relationship than they are, when you are giving more than you are receiving. These are signs, not proof, but signs, and they deserve attention. And when you notice these signs, you have a choice. You can ignore them, can tell yourself you are being paranoid, too sensitive, too demanding, can give the person the benefit of the doubt, can believe their explanations. And sometimes this is the right choice. Sometimes people deserve grace. Sometimes relationships go through difficult periods and come out stronger. But sometimes the signs are accurate. Sometimes your instincts are trying to protect you, and ignoring them, overriding them in favor of hope or fear of being alone, that can lead to years of pain that could have been avoided. So the wisdom is to hold both, to remain open and to remain discerning, to give people chances and to maintain boundaries, to be vulnerable and to be self-protective. This is the balance, and it is difficult because it requires constant calibration, constant assessment, constant willingness to adjust based on new information. It requires staying present, staying conscious, refusing to go on autopilot in your relationships, refusing to ignore what you see because acknowledging it would be inconvenient. This is exhausting, And this is why many people choose unconsciousness, choose to sleepwalk through their relationships, choose to ignore signs, override instincts, rationalize red flags. Because consciousness is demanding. It requires you to take responsibility, to make difficult choices, to potentially be alone rather than in a relationship that diminishes you. And most people are more afraid of being alone than they are of being diminished. So they stay. They tolerate. They hope. And sometimes hope is rewarded, but often it is not. Now we must address the question of whether this knowledge makes you complicit, whether understanding manipulation makes you a manipulator, whether seeing the theater makes you an actor. And the answer is complex, because knowledge is neutral. It is what you do with it that matters. You can understand how guilt works and use that understanding to control others. Or you can understand how guilt works and use that understanding to resist being controlled. You can understand gaslighting and use it as a weapon. Or you can understand gaslighting and use that understanding to protect yourself and others. The difference is intention, is consciousness, is the willingness to examine your own behavior and take responsibility for your impact. If you use this knowledge to exploit, to harm, to take from others without giving, then yes, you are complicit. You are part of the problem. But if you use this knowledge to protect yourself, to build healthier relationships, to recognize and interrupt your own patterns of unconscious manipulation, then you are part of the solution. You are contributing to a world where people can be more honest, more authentic, more genuinely connected. But you must be vigilant, because the line between protection and exploitation is thin, and it is easy to cross without noticing. Easy to tell yourself that you are just setting boundaries when you are actually punishing. Easy to tell yourself that you are just being honest when you are actually being cruel. Easy to tell yourself that you are just protecting yourself when you are actually closing yourself off to genuine connection. The ego is skilled at rationalization, at making selfishness look like self-care, at making cruelty look like honesty, at making manipulation look like strategy. So you must examine yourself constantly. You must ask, what am I actually doing here? What is my true intention? Am I acting from fear or from love? Am I trying to control or to connect? Am I defending myself or attacking the other person? These questions are uncomfortable, because often the answers are not flattering. Often, you discover that you are not as evolved as you believed, that you are still operating from wounds, still trying to get from others what you cannot give yourself, still performing, still hiding, still afraid. And this discovery is humbling, but it is also necessary, because you cannot change what you do not acknowledge. You cannot grow beyond patterns you refuse to see. You cannot become more conscious without facing your unconsciousness. And this facing is the work, not the work of understanding others, the work of understanding yourself, of seeing your own masks, your own manipulations, your own capacity for harm, and taking responsibility for all of it. This is the path that few choose, because it is painful, because it requires giving up the story that you are the good person, the victim, the one who has been wronged. It requires acknowledging that you have also wronged others, that you have also manipulated, that you have also worn masks and performed roles and used people to meet your needs, that you are not innocent, that none of us are innocent, that we are all complicit in the theater, all actors and audience simultaneously. But in this acknowledgement, there is freedom, because when you stop trying to be good, when you stop trying to be right, when you accept that you are a flawed human doing your best with limited tools and inherited wounds, then you can relax, can stop performing, can stop defending, can simply be. And in that being, you create space for others to be as well, to drop their masks, to stop performing, to meet you in the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of human connection. This is what is possible. Not perfection, not the elimination of all manipulation, not the end of performance, but moments, moments of genuine encounter, moments where two people see each other clearly and choose each other anyway, moments where vulnerability is met with care rather than exploitation, moments where honesty is received as a gift rather than a weapon. These moments are rare, but they are real, and they are worth the risk, worth the pain, worth the work, because in these moments, You remember what it is to be human. Not the performed version, not the masked version, but the actual version. The version that is frightened and brave, selfish and generous, cruel and kind. The version that contains multitudes, that contradicts itself, that is never just one thing. And in being seen in your full complexity, in your full humanity, something in you relaxes. Something that has been clenched your entire life unclenches. And you breathe. Really breathe. Perhaps for the first time. This is what we are all seeking. Whether we know it or not, whether we admit it or not, we are seeking to be seen, to be known, to be accepted in our full, messy, complicated humanity. And we are seeking to see others, to know others, to accept others in their full, messy, complicated humanity. This is the deepest human need, deeper than the need for food or shelter or safety. The need to not be alone, not just physically, but existentially, to have our inner experience witnessed and validated by another consciousness, to know that we are not the only one who feels this way, who struggles this way, who fears this way. And the tragedy is that we spend most of our lives hiding this need, pretending we do not need, pretending we are self-sufficient, pretending we are fine alone, because needing is vulnerable. Needing gives others power over us. Needing means we can be rejected, can be abandoned, can be hurt, so we hide the need. We perform independence. We wear the mask of not caring, and we die lonely, surrounded by people who never knew us, who never saw beneath the performance, who loved the mask but never met the person wearing it. So what is the alternative? The alternative is courage. The courage to need, the courage to want, the courage to admit that you are not self-sufficient, that you require connection, that you are vulnerable to rejection, and you are going to risk it anyway. Because the alternative of safety and isolation, is not actually living. It is existing. It is surviving. But it is not living. Living requires risk, requires vulnerability, requires the willingness to be hurt. And most people are not willing. They have been hurt before. They have trusted and been betrayed. They have opened themselves and been rejected. And they have decided, consciously or unconsciously, that they will not risk it again, that they will keep their masks on, that they will perform, that they will stay safe. And this decision is understandable. It is rational. It is self-protective. But it is also a kind of death, a death of possibility, a death of connection, a death of the self that could have been if only you had been brave enough to be seen. And here we arrive at the heart of it. The art of defeating people without raising your voice is not really about defeating people. It is about understanding human nature so deeply that you can navigate it skillfully, so that you can protect yourself from those who would exploit you, so that you can recognize your own patterns and choose differently, so that you can build relationships based on genuine recognition rather than performance and manipulation. The defeat is not of others. It is of the patterns, the unconscious dynamics, the inherited wounds, the automatic responses, the masks we wear without knowing we are wearing them. To defeat these things, you do not need to raise your voice. You do not need to fight. You do not need to force. You simply need to see clearly, to see yourself, to see others, to see the theater for what it is. And in that seeing, to choose consciousness over unconsciousness, to choose authenticity over performance, to choose connection over control. These choices are not easy. They are not comfortable. They do not guarantee success or happiness or love. But they guarantee something more important. They guarantee that you are living your life, not someone else's idea of your life, not a performance of life, but actual life. Messy and uncertain and frightening and beautiful. And this brings us to the final lesson, the lesson that is hardest to accept, that you cannot control how others respond to you. You cannot make someone see you, cannot make someone value you, cannot make someone love you. You can only control yourself, your choices, your responses, your willingness to be authentic. And sometimes, your authenticity will be rejected. Sometimes, people will prefer your mask, will be more comfortable with your performance, will not want to deal with the complexity of your actual self, and you must let them go. Must accept that not everyone can meet you where you are, that some people are still too invested in the theater to step off stage. And that is their choice, their path, their life to live or not live. Your responsibility is only to yourself, to your own integrity, to your own authenticity, to your own willingness to be seen. And if you can do this, if you can show up as yourself and allow others to respond however they respond, then you have won. Not one in the sense of defeating others, but one in the sense of defeating the fear that keeps most people masked. The fear that who they actually are is not enough, is not lovable, is not worthy of connection. Because here is the truth that no one wants to tell you. You are enough, exactly as you are. Not as you could be, not as you should be, not as you would be if you just tried harder, but as you are, right now, in this moment, with all your flaws and failures and fears. You are enough. And the people who cannot see this, who cannot value this, who need you to be different to love you, those people are not your people. And trying to twist yourself into shapes that fit their expectations will only leave you exhausted and resentful and disconnected from yourself. So the real art, the real skill, is not in defeating others. It is in defeating the voice in your head that says you are not enough, that says you need to perform, that says you need to hide, that says you need to be more, do more, achieve more to be worthy of love. That voice is a liar. It has always been a liar. It is the voice of every wound you have ever received, every rejection, every criticism, every moment someone made you feel small. And it is time to stop listening to it. This is the work, not understanding manipulation, not learning to control others, but learning to stop controlling yourself, to stop performing, to stop hiding, to show up as you are and trust that the right people will see you, will value you, will choose you, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. And real is rare. Real is precious. Real is what everyone is actually seeking, even when they do not know it, even when they are still too afraid to be real themselves. So you go first. You take off the mask. You stop performing. You risk rejection. You risk judgment. You risk being misunderstood. And some people will reject you. Some people will judge you. Some people will misunderstand you. And it will hurt, but it will not destroy you, because you will know that their rejection is not of you. It is of their own fear reflected back at them. It is of their own inability to be authentic. It is of their own investment in the theater. And you can have compassion for that, can understand that they are doing their best with the tools they have. And you can let them go, can wish them well, can hope that someday they will be brave enough to take off their own mask. But you cannot wait for them, cannot put your mask back on to make them comfortable, cannot return to performing to maintain a connection that was never real. This is the price of authenticity. You lose relationships that were based on performance. You lose the approval of people who needed you to be someone you are not. You lose the comfort of fitting in, of being understood, of being accepted by the majority. But what you gain is yourself, your actual self, not the performed version, not the masked version, but the real version, the version that has been waiting your entire life to be seen, to be known, to be allowed to exist without apology or explanation. And when you find others who have also taken off their masks, when you meet in that place of authenticity, something extraordinary happens. You recognize each other, not because you are the same, but because you are both real, both willing to be seen, both brave enough to risk connection without the protection of performance. And in that recognition, there is a depth of connection that is not possible between masks, a knowing that goes beyond words, a sense of coming home to something you did not know you were missing. These connections are rare, but they are possible, and they are worth everything. Worth the loneliness of the journey, worth the pain of letting go of relationships that no longer serve you, worth the fear of being rejected, worth the discomfort of being seen. Because in these connections, you are not alone, not in the superficial way of being surrounded by people, but in the deep way of being truly known, of having your inner experience witnessed and validated, of knowing that you are not the only one who feels this way, who struggles this way, who fears this way, who hopes this way. This is what we have been exploring, not techniques of manipulation, not strategies for control, but the architecture of human connection, the ways we hide from each other, the ways we hurt each other, the ways we use each other, and the ways we can, if we are brave enough, truly see each other, truly know each other, truly choose each other, not because we need each other to fill our voids, but because we recognize each other as fellow travelers, as fellow humans trying to navigate this strange and difficult experience of being conscious in a world that often feels hostile to consciousness. And in that recognition, there is power, not power over others, but power with others, the power of solidarity, of shared humanity, of knowing that we are all in this together, all wearing masks, all performing, all frightened, all longing, all hoping that someone will see beneath the surface and love what they find there. And when we can be that someone for each other, when we can see and be seen, when we can know and be known, then the theater loses its power. Then the masks become optional rather than mandatory. Then we can choose when to perform and when to be real. And in that choice, there is freedom. This is the journey, from unconscious performance to conscious choice, from manipulation to authenticity, from control to connection. It is not a linear journey. You will backslide. You will put your mask back on when you are scared. You will manipulate when you are desperate. You will perform when you are tired. And that is okay. That is human. The goal is not perfection. The goal is awareness. The goal is catching yourself. The goal is choosing differently more often than you used to. The goal is slowly, gradually, over time, becoming more integrated, more whole, more able to be yourself in more situations, with more people. And as you do this work, as you become more authentic, something interesting happens. You become less interested in defeating others, less interested in winning, less interested in being right, because you realize that these things are distractions. Distractions from the real work of being human, of connecting, of loving, of being present. You realize that the person you were trying to defeat was never really the enemy. They were just another wounded human doing their best. Just another actor in the theater. Just another person wearing a mask because they are too afraid to show their face. And you can have compassion for that. Can understand that their manipulation comes from fear, that their control comes from feeling out of control, that their cruelty comes from pain. This does not mean you tolerate it. Does not mean you stay in relationships that harm you. Does not mean you sacrifice yourself on the altar of understanding. But it means you can set boundaries without hatred, can protect yourself without dehumanizing the other person, can walk away without needing them to be the villain, can simply say, "This does not work for me," and move on. This is maturity. This is wisdom. This is what it looks like to defeat someone without raising your voice. Not because you are manipulating them, but because you are so grounded in yourself, so clear about your values, so unshakable in your sense of worth, that their attempts to destabilize you simply do not work. You are not reactive. You are not defensive. You are not trying to prove anything. You simply are. And in that being, you have a power that cannot be taken from you, because it does not come from others. It comes from you. This is the power we have been seeking all along. Not power over others, but power over ourselves. The power to choose our responses. The power to maintain our center. The power to be authentic even when authenticity is risky. The power to love even when love makes us vulnerable. The power to hope even when hope has disappointed us. The power to keep showing up as ourselves even when ourselves has been rejected. This is the only power that matters. The only power that lasts. The only power that actually changes anything. Because when you change yourself, when you become more conscious, more authentic, more integrated, you change the system. You change the dynamics of every relationship you are in. You stop participating in patterns that do not serve you. You stop enabling manipulation. You stop performing for approval. You stop hiding to stay safe. And in stopping these things, you create space for something new, something more real, something more alive. And others notice. They may not be able to articulate what is different about you, but they feel it. They feel that you are more solid, more present, more real. And some will be drawn to this. We'll want what you have. We'll ask how you got there. And you can share, can tell them about the journey, about the work, about the pain and the freedom. And some will be inspired, will begin their own journey, will start taking off their own masks. And slowly, one person at a time, the theater begins to empty. People begin to step off stage, begin to stop performing, begin to meet each other in reality rather than in performance. This is how change happens. Not through revolution, not through force, not through defeating others, but through transformation, through individuals choosing differently, through people becoming brave enough to be real, through the slow, gradual, unglamorous work of becoming more conscious, more authentic, more whole. And as more people do this work, the culture shifts, the expectations shift, the norms shift, and what was once rare, authenticity, begins to become more common. Not universal, never universal, but more common, more possible, more supported. This is the vision, not a world without masks, but a world where masks are optional, where people can choose when to perform and when to be real, where vulnerability is met with care more often than exploitation, where authenticity is valued more than performance, where connection is prioritized over control. This world is possible, but it requires each of us to do our part, to do our work, to take off our masks, to risk being seen, to choose authenticity even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is costly, even when it would be easier to keep performing. And so, the curtain falls on this act, but the show continues inside each of us, in the silence of our thoughts. The mask we've analyzed today, you may know it well, you may wear it, or perhaps you see it in someone you love. The comment section below is not a place for judgment. It's our stage for confessions, a safe space for observers. Use that space to share your story. What mask did you have to wear to survive? We want to hear from you. And if you felt understood here, subscribe. Because here, you are not alone. Together, we'll keep unraveling human theater, one mask at a time. The next act is about to begin.